Apple discontinued the iPod Shuffle and iPod Nano. Apple secretly discontinued the Shuffle and the Nano yesterday when they took off those two products from the Apple Store. iPods revolutionized the music business, but the days of iPods are numbered. The only iPod is left is the iPod Touch. You could right now get the iPod Touch 6th generation for $200. But nowadays, who wants an iPod Touch? There's just no more use for it right now. Get the iPhone SE or get the iPhone 6. iPod Touches only work when you have Wi-Fi. They don't have cellular data, which means you can't use it practically outside your house. There's better options than the iPod Touch now. With the iPhone 6 around $200 and you got the brand new iPhone SE for $400. But at the very least, the iPod Touch 6th generation is going to run iOS 11. The iPod Touch 6th generation is not going to be able to run iOS 12. It doesn't have the processor to support it. Next year at this time, we should all be on the lookout for Apple to discontinue the iPod Touch. And when Apple discontinues the iPod Touch, that's the end of the iPod era. The iPod Nano, Shuffle, and Touch would all be discontinued. That's the end of the iPod era in Apple's history. iPods were meant to play music. That was a great purpose 10 years ago when iPhones didn't exist. But now iPhones exist and they could play music and do so much more than what iPods can do. iPods are just for the single use for music. That's why Apple's discontinuing each of those iPod products, because they only have one sole purpose. Let's get back to the discontinuing of the iPod Nano and Shuffle. I never personally owned the iPod Nano or Shuffle because when I started listening to music, I had the iPhone 3GS when that phone came out, and that was in the 3rd grade. So there was no purpose for me to own the iPod Shuffle or Nano. But looking back at that, I wish I would have owned iPod Nano or Shuffle. I mean, I would have loved to know what it's like to have one of those right now. Yes, the Shuffle and Nano have a headphone jack. So does this Touch, and the iPod Touch 6th generation has a headphone jack too. The iPod lineup relies on the headphone jack, and Apple's trying to move away from the headphone jack and try to go wireless. And the iPod Shuffle and Nano don't support wireless. They don't even support Apple's AirPods. I'm also pretty sure that the Shuffle and Nano don't even support Apple Music. I mean, I have Apple Music. Apple Music is great. Better than Spotify. Apple Music is great, but the Shuffle and Nano doesn't even support that. So for me, the Shuffle and Nano were already discontinued in my mind. Apple just had to put the stamp of approval on that. But it's the death of the iPod Nano and Shuffle. It's kind of sad. Apple's forgetting the past and just moving to the future, because that's what Apple's all about. And soon, Apple's gonna discontinue the iPod Touch. And when Apple does that, I'm sure to make a video on that too. iPods were a game changer. Most of you out there don't even remember the iPod Shuffle or Nano. All you are familiar with is the iPod Touch. That just shows how dated the Shuffle and Nano are. Apple hasn't updated the Nano or Shuffle in years. I think they last updated it in 2010. So it's been what, 7 years since they last updated the Shuffle or Nano? It's been a long time. The last iPod Touch update was just 2 years ago. Apple is trying to forget the iPod lineup. iPods have no use in this present day and age. But back then, they revolutionized the music game. You could just carry a small iPod Shuffle and listen to music with headphones. Back then, no other technology like that existed. So I would be on the lookout when Apple's gonna discontinue the iPod Touch, because frankly, it's coming soon. It's not gonna be this year, don't worry. But when iOS 12 drops, look out for the discontinuing of the iPod Touch. So the iPod Shuffle and Nano are dead, and it's almost the end of the iPod era in Apple's history. And that's a big part of Apple's history. That's what that got them going to the iPhone. I love your thoughts on if Apple should have discontinued the iPod Nano and Shuffle. RIP. And until then, I'll see you in the next one. Better than Spotify.